My daughter said poor people shouldn't dream so big. She said this while handing me $200, my monthly allowance for living in the shed behind the house I built with my own hands. I'm Jimmy Sullivan, 76 years old, and for the past 3 months, my own children have been treating me like hired help on my own land. They moved me out of the master bedroom where I held my wife's hand as cancer took her 8 years ago. They put me in a tool shed with a cot and a space heater, telling me to be grateful they weren't putting me in a nursing home. What they don't know is that I own $40 million in land and oil rights spread across 3 counties. What they don't know is that I've been playing the long game for 4 decades, watching and waiting to see what kind of people they'd become when they thought there was nothing to inherit. Yesterday, my son tried to sell my property to developers for $800,000. He forged my signature and told them he had power of attorney. He's about to find out that the worthless farmland he's selling is worth 50 times what he thinks. They thought they were managing a broken-down old farmer. Turns out they've been stealing from one of the wealthiest landowners in West Virginia, and I've got the FBI recordings to prove it. This story has more reversals than a mountain road in a thunderstorm. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, hit subscribe, because you're about to see what happens when the quiet one finally speaks up. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll never underestimate a farmer again. The shed thing started 3 months ago. Ashley, that's my daughter, she married this dentist over in Charleston, Dr. Morrison. Nice enough fellow, I suppose, but Ashley got ideas about what kind of family she wanted to be part of. The kind that doesn't have a 76-year-old farmer tracking mud through the marble foyer. "Dad," she said, standing in my kitchen like she owned it, "we're hosting the Morrison family reunion here next month. The house needs updating. Maybe you could stay in the workshop for a while." The workshop. That's what she called the shed I built for storing tools and seed bags. 8 by 12 feet, 1 window, no insulation. I'd been sleeping in the bedroom my wife Sarah and I shared for 38 years, the room where I held her hand when the cancer took her 8 years ago. But Ashley thought it sent the wrong message. Trevor, my son, he was worse. 43 years old and still explaining the world to his old man like I was born yesterday. "Dad, you've got to understand," he said, leaning against the kitchen counter like he was doing me a favor by talking. "Ashley's embarrassed. Her in-laws think they think we're poor farmers. And honestly, looking around here," he gestured at the peeling wallpaper, the linoleum floor I'd been meaning to replace for 10 years. "Can you blame them?" I could have blamed them. Could have told them about the metal filing cabinet in the shed, the one with the lock they never thought to ask about. Could have mentioned why I get mail from 3 different county offices, or why that petroleum engineer fellow keeps calling to check on the property status. Instead, I just nodded. "I'll move my things." Trevor looked relieved. Ashley looked vindicated. They thought they'd handled the old man with kid gloves, kept his dignity intact while solving their social problem. That night, lying on the narrow cot in the shed, I listened to them through the window, planning their barbecue, their family reunion, their bright future that somehow didn't include the man who'd carved this life out of raw dirt and determination. I reached under the cot and pulled out a small metal box, the kind banks used to give you for storing documents. Inside were papers most people would never think to keep: land deeds, oil lease agreements, trust documents dating back to 1978. Papers that told a very different story about just how poor old Jimmy Sullivan really was. But they'd never asked to see what was in the box. People think farming is simple. You plant seeds, you harvest crops. You hope the weather cooperates. They don't understand that real farming, the kind that lasts generations, is about reading the land like a book, understanding what it's telling you about what lies beneath. I started reading this land in 1978, the year Sarah and I moved here with a 2-year-old Trevor and baby Ashley. 40 acres of what the previous owner called marginal farmland. Too rocky for corn, too hilly for soybeans, too far from the main road for anything sensible. But I'd grown up on stories from my grandfather about the old days, when oil companies first came through these hills in the 1920s, buying up mineral rights from farmers who didn't know what they were signing. Most of those farmers sold their surface land eventually, moved to town, forgot what they'd had. But a few families held on, a few families remembered. The Sullivans remembered. See, what Trevor and Ashley never bothered to learn was why their great-grandfather bought this particular patch of nowhere in 1923. It wasn't for the farming. It was for what the geological surveys were already whispering about, the Marcellus Shale Formation running deep underneath these hills like a sleeping giant made of natural gas and oil. But in 1978, that was still just family stories. What mattered was the price. 40 acres for $12,000, which was every penny Sarah and I had saved from my job at the chemical plant. We moved into the old farmhouse, fixed what we could afford to fix, and started growing what would grow. I let my children think that was the whole story. Let them believe their daddy was just a simple farmer who got lucky with some decent soil and a lot of hard work. Let them think the 3 or 4 decent harvests we had in the 80s were the extent of our success. They never asked why I spent so many Saturday mornings driving to county offices in Jefferson and Greene counties. Never wondered why I got mail from law firms in Pittsburgh and Morgantown. Never questioned why I always paid for things in cash, or why I banked at 3 different institutions across the region. When Sarah got sick, I could have told them then, could have explained why her medical bills, $200,000 worth of experimental treatments and specialists, never seemed to break us financially. Could have mentioned that what they thought was my retirement savings was actually just the interest from investments they didn't know existed. But Sarah and I had agreed years earlier, the children needed to learn the value of work before they learned the value of wealth. Needed to understand that money was earned, not inherited. Needed to prove they could build something themselves before they got handed something their great-grandfather had built. So when Trevor graduated college with that business degree and immediately started talking about developing the property, I stayed quiet. When Ashley married her dentist and started making comments about upgrading our family image, I nodded along. When they both started treating me like a burden they needed to manage, rather than a father they needed to respect, I bided my time. The truth was, I owned more than just our original 40 acres. Starting in 1980, whenever neighboring properties came up for sale, I'd quietly make an offer. Cash offers, through different LLCs, with lawyers handling the paperwork. The Hendricks place in 1983, the old Morrison farm, no relation to Ashley's in-laws, in 1987. The Clearwater property in 1992. 3 more parcels through the 90s. By 2010, the Sullivan holdings stretched across parts of 3 counties, Washington, Jefferson, and Greene. Not all contiguous, but all connected by the same underground geological formation that my great-grandfather had bet on nearly a century ago. 2,400 acres total, some of it prime farmland now that agricultural techniques had improved, some of it timberland that had been carefully managed for sustainable harvesting, and all of it sitting on top of natural gas deposits that the petroleum industry was just beginning to figure out how to reach. But my children knew none of this. To them, I was just their father, who'd been smart enough to hang on to the family farm when other people were selling out to developers. A small success story. A man who'd done well enough to retire comfortably, but not well enough to change their lives. They thought my life was small, thought my dreams had been small, thought I was content to die in that shed they'd moved me to, grateful for their monthly allowance and their occasional visits. Trevor had already started talking to developers about the inevitable sale of the property after I passed. Ashley had already started researching appropriate care facilities for elderly parents who become too much of a burden for their adult children to handle at home. They were making plans for my money before I was even dead. The only question was when to show them how wrong they'd been about everything. The call came on a Tuesday morning in September. I was in the shed reviewing some paperwork from my attorney when Trevor's truck pulled up the driveway faster than usual. He didn't knock, just pushed through the shed door like he owned the place, which, in his mind, he did. "Dad, we need to talk." He had that voice he used when he thought he was managing me, patient but firm, like he was talking to a child who'd done something wrong but didn't understand why. "I'm listening." "Ashley and I have been talking. This place—" He gestured around the shed, but I knew he meant the whole property. "It's becoming a burden. The upkeep, the taxes, the constant worry about you living out here alone. It's not fair to any of us." I set down my reading glasses. "What are you suggesting?" Hartwell Development made an offer. A good offer. $850,000 for the whole property. He paused like he expected me to be impressed. "Dad, that's more than $20,000 an acre for land that's never produced more than subsistence farming income." $850,000 for what they thought was 40 acres of marginal farmland. I had to admire the audacity, both Hartwell's for making such a low-ball offer and Trevor's for thinking he had the authority to consider it. "Who did you talk to at Hartwell?" "Jim Hartwell himself. Nice guy. He explained the whole process. They handle everything. Surveys, inspections, closing costs. All you have to do is sign the paperwork." Trevor pulled a folder from under his arm. "I brought the preliminary agreement, just to look at. No pressure." No pressure. Like I was some old fool who'd be grateful for anyone willing to take this worthless dirt off his hands. I opened the folder and read through the first page. Standard development purchase agreement, but the legal description made me smile. 40 acres, more or less, bounded by County Road 15 to the north and the old Henderson property line to the south. The old Henderson property line. The same Henderson property I'd bought in 1983. "This legal description," I said, pointing to the paragraph. "You sure it's accurate?" Trevor glanced at it dismissively. "Dad, I'm not a surveyor, but Hartwell's people know what they're doing. They've been developing rural properties for 20 years. "And you feel comfortable signing for property you haven't had independently surveyed?" "It's 40 acres, Dad. Same 40 acres Grandpa bought. Same 40 acres you've been farming. What's to survey?" I nodded slowly. "Well, son, if you think you have the authority to sign for this property, then I suppose you should go ahead and do that." Trevor looked relieved. "Really? I mean, I know it's hard to let go, but this is the right decision for all of us. $850 is more money than you'll ever need for retirement, and Ashley and I can help you find a nice place closer to town." A nice place closer to town. I repeated the phrase like I was trying it on for size. That sounds thoughtful. The lawyer wants to meet tomorrow to finalize everything. Hartwell's eager to close before the end of the month. Trevor was already putting the papers back in the folder. "Dad, I know this is emotional, but you'll see. This is going to be the best thing for everyone." "I'm sure it will be." After Trevor left, I sat in the shed for a long time, thinking about that legal description. 40 acres. The same 40 acres my grandfather had bought in 1923. The same 40 acres Trevor thought he was signing away to Hartwell Development. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I'd memorized 40 years ago. Larry, it's Jimmy Sullivan. We need to meet tomorrow morning, before 9 o'clock. I paused, watching Trevor's truck disappear down the county road. And Larry, bring the complete property files, all of them. Everything okay, Jimmy? Everything's about to be. Tomorrow was going to be very educational for my son. Larry Hendricks had been my attorney for 30 years, ever since that first property acquisition back in 1983. He'd also been Sarah's cousin, which meant he understood the importance of family, and the importance of keeping certain family business private until the time was right. He arrived at 8:30 Wednesday morning, carrying 2 briefcases and wearing the expression of a man who'd been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time. Jimmy, he said, settling into the kitchen chair across from me. Trevor called my office yesterday afternoon. Seems he thinks he's got authority to sell property on your behalf. That's what I gathered. You want to handle this gently, or you want to handle this definitively? Before I could answer, Trevor's truck pulled into the driveway again. This time, Ashley was with him, and they both had the eager look of people about to close a deal that would change their lives. They knocked on the door this time, which I took as a sign of respect for the formality of the occasion. Dad, Trevor said, I brought Ashley so we could all be here for this. And Larry, good to see you. I assume Dad filled you in? Larry nodded. He did. Why don't you both sit down? Ashley took the chair beside Trevor, smoothing her skirt like she was at a business meeting. We're just so relieved this is finally happening, she said. Daddy's been carrying this burden alone for too long. The burden, I repeated. Yes, let's talk about that. Larry opened his first briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Trevor, before we discuss any sale, I need to clarify something about the property in question. You mentioned 40 acres to Hartwell Development? That's right. The original family property. I see. Larry spread several documents across the kitchen table. Jimmy, would you like to explain, or shall I? I looked at my children, really looked at them. Trevor with his confident smile, Ashley with her eager eyes. They thought they were about to inherit $850,000 split between them. They thought they were about to solve their father's financial problems and their own social concerns in one clean transaction. Larry, go ahead. Larry put on his reading glasses. Trevor, Ashley, your father doesn't own 40 acres. According to the most recent survey and title consolidation, the Sullivan holdings encompass 2,400 acres across Washington, Jefferson, and Greene counties. The kitchen went very quiet. Ashley spoke first. That's not possible. This is just the family farm. 40 acres, same as always. Larry pulled out a large survey map, the kind with colored overlays and precise boundary markings. This green area represents the original 1923 purchase, your great-grandfather's 40 acres. The blue areas represent subsequent acquisitions between 1980 and 2010. The red areas represent timber rights purchased separately. The yellow areas represent mineral rights acquisitions. Trevor was staring at the map like it was written in a foreign language. Dad, what is this? When did you buy all this? Gradually, I said, when neighboring properties came up for sale, when the owners needed cash, when the market was favorable. But how did you afford? Ashley's voice trailed off as she began doing math in her head. Larry answered for me. Your father has been operating as a small-scale land investment company for 40 years. The properties have been purchased through various LLCs, with financing arranged through agricultural development loans, timber revenue, and... He paused and pulled out another document. Mineral rights leases. Mineral rights, Trevor repeated slowly. Yes, in 1985, your father leased drilling rights to Appalachian Energy Corporation. The lease covers approximately 1,800 acres of the total holdings and includes provisions for natural gas extraction from the Marcellus Shale Formation. Ashley's face had gone pale. How much money are we talking about? Larry consulted another document. The most recent appraisal values the total land holdings at approximately $15 million. The mineral rights, given current market conditions and proven reserves, are estimated at $25 million. However, these are conservative estimates based on limited development. Full development could potentially, he shrugged, well, significantly more. 40 million, I said quietly. Give or take a few million, depending on natural gas prices and development timelines. Trevor stood up so fast his chair nearly fell over. $40 million? You've been sitting on $40 million while we gave you an allowance? While we moved you to the shed? While you treated me like a burden you needed to manage, I corrected. While you made plans to put me in a nursing home. While you decided my life was too small and my dreams weren't worth respecting. Ashley was staring at the survey map like it might change if she looked hard enough. The Hartwell contract would have been the largest real estate fraud in this county's history, Larry said matter-of-factly. Trevor signed an agreement to sell property he doesn't own, has never owned, and has no legal authority to transfer. If that sale had gone through, both he and Hartwell Development would be looking at criminal charges. Trevor sat back down heavily. I didn't know. Dad, how was I supposed to know? You could have asked. Asked what? Asked if I needed your help. Asked if I wanted to sell. Asked if I had any say in plans being made for my life and my property. I folded my hands on the table. Instead, you assumed I was too old and too stupid to manage my own affairs. The room fell silent again. Finally, Ashley whispered, What happens now? Now, I said, we talk about what respect looks like. The call to Larry's office took place that same afternoon, after Trevor and Ashley had left in stunned silence. But it wasn't the only call I made. Caroline? It's Jimmy Sullivan. Yes, I know it's been a while. I need your services again. Caroline Foster had worked as a private investigator for 15 years before I'd hired her in 2018 to handle what I'd called routine background checks on some business associates. What I'd really wanted was someone to quietly monitor my children's financial activities. Not out of suspicion, but out of the same protective instinct that had led me to build the land empire in the first place. What can I do for you, Jimmy? I need you to dig deeper into Trevor's financial situation. Bank records, credit reports, business dealings. Same for Ashley. And I need it fast. How fast? 24 hours. And Caroline? I suspect you're going to find some irregularities. The next morning, Larry filed an emergency injunction with the Washington County Court, requesting a freeze on all real estate transactions involving any property listed under the various Sullivan LLCs. The legal reasoning was simple. Prevent fraud while sorting out the ownership issues that Trevor's attempted sale had revealed. By noon, every bank in the Tri-County area had received court orders freezing any accounts associated with Sullivan Properties, Sullivan LLCs, or James Sullivan personally. That's when my phone started ringing. Dad? Ashley's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Something's wrong with my credit card, and the bank says there's a hold on my mortgage account." "Is there?" "They won't tell me what it's about, just that there's a court order." "Dad, what's happening?" I imagine Larry's being thorough. An hour later, Trevor called. "Dad, I just got fired from my job. They said there's some kind of investigation involving my personal finances, and company policy requires suspension pending resolution." "What investigation? What did you do?" "I protected my interests." "Your interests? I'm your son." "Yes," I said, "you are. And for 43 years, I've watched you grow up believing you were entitled to things you hadn't earned. Now we're going to find out what you've actually earned." That evening, Caroline called with her preliminary report. "Jimmy, you were right to be suspicious. Trevor's been accessing accounts he shouldn't have access to. Over the past 6 months, he's made 8 unauthorized withdrawals from what appears to be your Wells Fargo business account. Small amounts, $500 to $1,000 each time, but it adds up to about $7,000 total." "How did he get access?" "Looks like he added himself as an authorized user back in March, when you were in the hospital for that kidney stone procedure. Forged your signature on the bank forms." I remembered that week. Ashley had insisted on handling my medical appointments, and Trevor had offered to take care of any business that couldn't wait. I'd been grateful for their concern at the time. What else? Ashley's been more creative. She's been receiving payments from Sunset Manor Nursing Home, $500 a month for the past 4 months. Looks like a finder's fee arrangement. For what? For referring potential residents. Jimmy, she's been getting paid to scout elderly people for nursing home placement. I sat in the shed, looking at the same 4 walls my children had decided were appropriate for their father, and felt something cold settle in my chest. "Caroline, I need you to document everything. Bank records, signatures, payment schedules, everything that proves what they've been doing." "Already on it." "Jimmy, there's something else. Trevor's been in contact with 3 other development companies besides Hartwell. Same kind of deal. He's been shopping around for the highest bidder for your land. He's told each of them that he has power of attorney for your affairs." "Does he?" "Not according to any legal documents I can find. But Jimmy, if any of these sales had gone through, I'd have lost everything, and Trevor would have pocketed the proceeds." That's about the size of it. After Caroline hung up, I sat in the shed for a long time, thinking about the children I'd raised, the values Sarah and I had tried to instill, the difference between making mistakes and making choices. Trevor hadn't made a mistake when he'd forged my signature at the bank. Ashley hadn't made a mistake when she'd signed up to get paid for putting elderly people in nursing homes. They'd made calculated decisions based on their belief that their father was too old and too stupid to notice. They'd been wrong about the stupid part. The next morning, I called a number I hadn't used in 2 years. "Agent Wells? This is Jimmy Sullivan. We spoke a couple of years ago about agricultural fraud in rural communities. I believe I may have some information relevant to your ongoing investigations." "Mr. Sullivan, good to hear from you. What kind of information?" "The kind that involves forged documents, unauthorized financial access, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud." "That's definitely something we'd want to look at. Are you willing to wear a wire?" I looked around the shed, at the narrow cot, at the single window that looked out on the house I'd built with my own hands, the house my children had decided I wasn't worthy to live in. "Agent Wells, I'd be happy to wear a wire." The family meeting happened on a Saturday. I'd called Trevor and Ashley both, told them we needed to sit down and discuss the new situation regarding the property. They came prepared for negotiation, walking into the kitchen with notebooks and printed emails from their respective lawyers. They didn't know Larry was already there, seated at the far end of the table with his briefcases open and papers arranged like evidence in a courtroom. "Dad," Trevor began, settling into his usual chair, "Ashley and I have been talking, and we think there might be a way to work this out that's fair to everyone." "I'm listening." Ashley pulled out her notebook. "We understand that the property situation is more complicated than we originally thought, and we want to acknowledge that we may have overstepped in trying to handle things without consulting you first." "Overstepped," I repeated. "The point is," Trevor continued, "we're family. We should be working together, not fighting each other. So we've come up with a proposal that recognizes your ownership while also acknowledging the role Ashley and I should play in managing such a large estate." Larry cleared his throat. "Before we discuss management roles, perhaps we should clarify the current legal situation." Trevor glanced at Larry with barely concealed irritation. "The legal situation is that my father owns more property than any of us realized. Now we need to figure out how to handle that responsibly." "Responsibly," Larry repeated, opening one of his briefcases. "Let's talk about responsibility, Trevor. Are you familiar with the concept of financial elder abuse?" Ashley's pen stopped moving. "What does that mean?" "It means unauthorized access to an elderly person's financial accounts. It means forging signatures on bank documents. It means accepting payments for services that directly conflict with an elderly person's best interests." Trevor's face went red. "Now wait just a minute. No, you wait." I spoke quietly, but Trevor stopped talking immediately. "Larry, show them what Caroline found." Larry spread the bank documents across the table like he was dealing cards. "Trevor, these are copies of withdrawal slips from your father's Wells Fargo business account. Your signature appears on 8 separate withdrawals over the past 6 months, totaling $7,200. Dad was in the hospital. I was helping manage his affairs." "With a forged power of attorney authorization." Larry slid another document across the table. "This is your signature on the bank's authorized user form. The problem is, the form shows your father's signature as well. And according to bank security cameras, your father was never present when this form was submitted." Ashley was staring at her brother like she'd never seen him before. "Trevor? You stole from Dad?" "I didn't steal anything. I borrowed money for business expenses, and I was planning to pay it back once the property sale went through." "The property sale you had no authority to make," Larry noted. I turned to Ashley. "And what about you?" "What about me?" Larry pulled out another set of documents. "Ashley, you've been receiving monthly payments from Sunset Manor Nursing Home. $500 a month for the past 4 months. According to their records, you're listed as a family placement specialist." Ashley's notebook slipped from her fingers. That's completely legal." "Legal, yes. Ethical?" Larry shrugged. "You've been receiving payments to identify elderly people who could be convinced to enter nursing home care, including your own father. I never told them about Dad specifically. But you did tour their facilities. You did ask about their admission process. And you did inquire about the financial requirements for placing someone with moderate cognitive decline into long-term care." Trevor slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. So we made some financial mistakes. We're family. Families work these things out." "Some financial mistakes," I said slowly. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Dad, you've been lying to us for 40 years. pretending to be poor while you were sitting on a fortune. Don't talk to me about honesty." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the land that stretched beyond what my children had ever bothered to explore. "You think I was lying. What else would you call it?" "I'd call it waiting. Waiting to see what kind of people you'd become when you thought there was nothing to inherit. Waiting to see if you'd treat your father with respect when you thought he couldn't do anything for you financially." Ashley's voice was barely a whisper. "And what did you find out?" I turned back to face them. "I found out that my son forges my signature and steals my money when he thinks he can get away with it. I found out that my daughter gets paid to put old people in nursing homes and was planning to put her own father in one. I found out that both of my children think I'm too stupid to notice any of this." Trevor stood up. "Dad, we can fix this. We can pay back the money. We can—" "You can what, Trevor? You can start treating me like a human being instead of an inconvenience? You can start asking my permission before making decisions about my life? You can start visiting me because you want to see your father instead of because you want to check on your inheritance?" "You've been lying to us for 40 years, Ashley said, tears starting to form. "How are we supposed to trust anything you say now?" "I never lied to you. I just didn't tell you everything. There's a difference." I sat back down at the table. "But you've both been lying to me. About the bank account, about the nursing home money, about your reasons for wanting to sell this property, about your reasons for moving me to the shed." The room fell silent. Finally, Trevor asked, "What happens now?" "Now we find out if there's any way to save this family." The call from Dr. Victoria Bennett came on Monday morning. I was expecting it. Ashley had made the appointment under the guise of making sure Dad's getting proper medical care, but the urgency in the doctor's voice caught me off guard. "Mr. Sullivan, your daughter contacted my office with some concerns about your cognitive status. She's suggested that a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation might be beneficial." "Beneficial to whom?" "Well, to you, of course, to ensure that you're receiving appropriate care and that your decision-making capacity is intact." I understood. Ashley had found a doctor willing to provide the medical justification she needed to seek guardianship. With a diagnosis of cognitive impairment, she and Trevor could petition the court to take control of my finances, my property, and my personal care decisions, including the decision to put me in Sunset Manor, where Ashley would collect her $500 monthly finder's fee. "Dr. Bennett, when would you like to schedule this evaluation?" "This week would be preferable. Your daughter seems quite concerned." "I'm sure she is." The evaluation took place Wednesday afternoon in Dr. Bennett's office in Morgantown. Ashley drove me there, chattering nervously about how this was just to make sure everything's okay, and how these things are routine for people our age. Dr. Bennett was a pleasant woman in her 50s who specialized in geriatric psychiatry. She spent the first hour asking standard questions about memory, orientation, and daily functioning. Then she moved into more complex territory. "Mr. Sullivan, your daughter has expressed concern about some recent financial decisions you've made, large property purchases, complex legal arrangements. She's worried that you may not fully understand the implications of these transactions." "What specifically concerns her?" "Well, she mentions that you've been making significant financial commitments without consulting family members. She's also concerned about your living situation. Apparently, you've chosen to live in somewhat reduced circumstances, despite having substantial assets." I looked at Ashley, sitting in the corner chair, nodding encouragingly at the doctor's questions. "Dr. Bennett, may I ask you something?" "Of course." If a person spends 40 years building a business empire, keeping detailed financial records, making strategic investments, and successfully managing complex legal transactions, would you consider that person cognitively impaired? Not necessarily, no. I pulled out the folder I'd brought with me. These are my personal financial records for the past decade. Bank statements, investment reports, tax returns, property management documents, all organized and maintained by me personally, without assistance from family members or financial advisors. Dr. Bennett took the folder and began reviewing the documents. Her eyebrows rose steadily as she turned the pages. Mr. Sullivan, these records show remarkably sophisticated financial management. Complex agricultural investments, strategic property acquisitions, tax optimization strategies. This level of financial planning would challenge most professional money managers. Thank you. Ashley, Dr. Bennett turned to my daughter. When you expressed concerns about your father's cognitive status, what specifically were you observing? Ashley shifted uncomfortably. Well, he's been making decisions without consulting us, living in that shed instead of the house, refusing to consider more appropriate living arrangements. More appropriate in what way? Well, he's 76 years old, living alone, managing all this property by himself. It's not safe. Doctor, Bennett looked back at the financial records. Mr. Sullivan, do you feel capable of managing your daily affairs independently? I do. Are you experiencing any memory problems, confusion, or difficulty with routine tasks? No. Have you been feeling depressed or anxious about your living situation? I considered the question carefully. Doctor, I've been disappointed in my family relationships, but I wouldn't characterize that as a mental health problem on my part. Dr. Bennett set down the folder. Ashley, based on my evaluation today, I see no evidence of cognitive impairment in your father. His memory is excellent, his reasoning ability is sophisticated, and his judgment appears sound. In fact, his financial records demonstrate a level of cognitive functioning that would be impressive for someone half his age. Ashley's face went pale. But the living situation. Choosing to live simply despite having wealth isn't a sign of mental illness. It's a lifestyle choice. Many wealthy people choose to live modestly for personal or philosophical reasons. But what about the shed? What kind of person chooses to live in a shed when they could afford better? Dr. Bennett glanced at me, then back at Ashley. Perhaps a person whose children moved him there and told him to be grateful for it? The ride home was silent until we reached the county road turnoff. Dad, Ashley said finally, I didn't mean for it to happen this way. What way? The evaluation. I really was worried about you, but also, she pulled over to the side of the road and put the car in park. Trevor and I talked to a lawyer about what would happen if you were declared incompetent, and we could get guardianship, control over the property, the finances, all of it. Make sure everything was handled properly. Handled properly according to whom? Ashley started crying. We just thought, God, Dad, $40 million. Do you know what that could mean for our families? For our children's education, for Trevor's business, for my future with Jonathan? Your future that apparently includes putting me in a nursing home. That was before I knew about the money. No, Ashley, that was before you knew I knew about the money. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The money doesn't change who you are. It just revealed who you were. What do you mean? I mean you were willing to put me in a nursing home for $500 a month when you thought I was poor. Finding out I'm rich didn't change your character, it just changed your calculations. She was crying harder now. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught? Both. I don't know. Both. When we got back to the property, Trevor's truck was already in the driveway. He was standing in the shed doorway, looking around at my modest living quarters with an expression I couldn't quite read. "How did it go?" he asked as we approached. Ashley wiped her eyes. "The doctor says Dad's fine, completely competent." Trevor's shoulders sagged. "So we can't—" "No, Trevor, we can't." That night, lying on the narrow cot in the shed, I made a decision that would change everything. I reached for my phone and dialed Agent Wells. "It's Jimmy Sullivan. Tomorrow morning, I want to have that conversation about wearing a wire." Agent Patricia Wells arrived at dawn Thursday, driving an unmarked sedan that could have belonged to any rural insurance salesman. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of practical demeanor that suggested she'd spent years convincing suspicious farmers to trust federal law enforcement. "Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate you coming forward with this. Agricultural fraud cases are often difficult to prosecute because families are reluctant to testify against each other. I'm not testifying against my family. I'm testifying for the truth." She spread the wire equipment across my kitchen table. A small transmitter, a recording device no bigger than a deck of cards, and what looked like an ordinary shirt button that was actually a miniature microphone. The device will record everything within a 15-foot radius. The button mic will pick up conversations even if you're speaking quietly. The transmitter has a 6-hour battery life, which should be more than sufficient for what we need. What exactly do you need? We need clear verbal admissions of the financial fraud. Trevor acknowledging that he forged your signature on bank documents. Ashley acknowledging that she accepted payments for identifying nursing home candidates. Most importantly, we need them to discuss their plans for future financial manipulation. Agent Wells attached the wire to my shirt, running the thin cable down my sleeve and connecting it to the recording device clipped to my belt. The button microphone replaced an ordinary button on my work shirt, invisible unless someone was looking for it specifically. "Mr. Sullivan, I want to be clear about something. Once we have these recordings, we'll be obligated to pursue criminal charges. This isn't something you can take back once it's done." Agent Wells, my children have spent the past 6 months stealing from me, lying to me, and planning to put me in a nursing home so they can control my assets. I don't think I want to take it back. "Are you certain they'll incriminate themselves?" I thought about Trevor's arrogance, Ashley's desperation, their shared belief that they could manipulate their old man without consequences. "Oh, they'll talk. The question is whether they can stop talking once they start." The plan was simple. I would call a family meeting ostensibly to discuss moving forward after the psychiatric evaluation. I would suggest that we could work out our differences privately, without involving lawyers or outside authorities. I would create an environment where Trevor and Ashley felt safe to speak openly about what they'd done and what they planned to do next. Then I would let them hang themselves. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon, same as always, in the kitchen of the house I'd built and the shed I'd been banished to. But this time, Agent Wells would be positioned in the barn, close enough to monitor the transmission and provide backup if needed. Friday night, I lay in the shed testing the equipment, practicing normal conversation while wearing the wire. The recording device picked up everything: the creak of the cot when I shifted position, the sound of pages turning when I read, even my own breathing when the room was quiet. Technology had come a long way since my grandfather's time, when a man's word and a handshake were sufficient to settle business disputes. Now, we needed electronic evidence and federal agents to prove what everyone already knew, that my children had betrayed the trust of the man who'd spent his life building something for them to inherit. Saturday morning, I called Trevor first. "Son, we need to talk, all 3 of us. This situation has gotten out of hand, and I think there's a way we can resolve it without involving outsiders." "What do you mean?" I mean, family business should stay in the family. No lawyers, no courts, no federal investigations. Just us, working out what's fair for everyone. Trevor was quiet for a moment. Dad, are you saying you'd be willing to let some things slide? In the interest of keeping the family together. I'm saying we should discuss it. 2 o'clock, kitchen table. I made the same call to Ashley, using almost the same words. The promise of family reconciliation, the suggestion that legal consequences could be avoided, the implication that their elderly father might be willing to forgive and forget in exchange for a little respect and honesty. By Saturday afternoon, I was ready to find out what my children really thought of their father when they believed he couldn't fight back. They arrived together, Trevor and Ashley, walking into the kitchen with the cautious optimism of people who thought they might be getting away with something after all. They'd brought coffee and pastries from town, a peace offering that might have been touching if I hadn't been wearing a federal wire. "Dad," Ashley began, setting the bakery box on the table, "we've been talking, and we want you to know how sorry we are about the way things have gone." "Sorry about which part specifically?" Trevor pulled out a chair, settling in with the kind of casual confidence that had been his trademark since high school. "All of it, really. The misunderstanding about the property size, the banking issues, the psychiatric evaluation. We should have communicated better." "The banking issues," I repeated. "You mean the $7,000 you took from my account?" "Borrowed, Dad. I borrowed that money, and I fully intend to pay it back." Trevor pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket. "In fact, I brought a check today. $7,200 with interest." He slid the check across the table. It was made out properly, signed in his usual flourish, dated that morning. "That's thoughtful, son. Of course, paying back stolen money doesn't make the theft disappear." "It wasn't theft," Trevor said, his voice taking on that patient tone he used when he thought he was explaining something to someone too simple to understand. "I had signatory authority on that account." "Signatory authority you obtained by forging my signature. I obtained emergency access while you were hospitalized. Maybe the paperwork wasn't perfect, but the intention was to help manage your affairs during a medical crisis." Ashley nodded enthusiastically. "And the nursing home consultation? Dad, that was just research. I wanted to understand what options might be available if your health declined. It was responsible planning." "Responsible planning that included accepting payments from Sunset Manor for referring clients." "That was—" Ashley hesitated. "Okay, that wasn't my best decision. But it wasn't about you specifically. It was just a general consulting arrangement." I leaned back in my chair, aware of the small recording device capturing every word. "So you're saying the nursing home payments weren't connected to your plans for my future care?" "What plans?" Trevor asked. "Ashley, what plans?" Ashley shot her brother a warning look, but it was too late. The question was already hanging in the air. "Well," Ashley said slowly, "we did discuss the possibility that Dad might eventually need more structured care. Given his age, his isolation out here, and the $40 million in assets he'd been hiding from us," Trevor added. "Trevor," Ashley hissed. But Trevor was warming up now, leaning forward with the enthusiasm of someone who thought he was among friends. "Come on, Ashley. We're all family here. Dad already knows we were planning for his eventual care needs. And honestly, Dad, can you blame us? Living out here in that shed, refusing to spend money on basic comfort when you're worth $40 million, that's not normal behavior." "Not normal how?" "Well, it's eccentric at best, and at worst," Trevor shrugged. "Look, I'm not saying you're incompetent, but the psychiatric evaluation was Ashley's idea, and it wasn't unreasonable." Ashley was staring at her brother like he'd lost his mind, but Trevor kept talking. "The point is, once we get guardianship established, we can make sure you're properly cared for. Nice facility, professional medical staff, all the amenities you deserve. And Ashley and I can handle the property management, which frankly is too much responsibility for one person anyway. Guardianship, I said, even though Dr. Bennett found me completely competent. Well, that was one doctor. We can get a second opinion, maybe from someone who understands the complexities of managing large estates. Ashley had gone pale. Trevor, stop talking. Why? Dad said he wanted to keep this in the family. Dad, Ashley and I have been discussing this for months. We know the property is worth a fortune now. We know you can afford the best care money can buy. We just want to make sure you get it, even if you're too stubborn to ask for help. And if I refuse this help? Trevor's friendly demeanor slipped slightly. Dad, with respect, you're 76 years old. How long do you really think you can keep managing a $40 million estate by yourself? Eventually, someone's going to have to step in. It might as well be family. Someone's going to have to step in, I repeated. That's right. And when that happens, Ashley and I want to make sure the property stays in the family instead of being broken up by courts or tax authorities. We've already talked to estate planning attorneys about the most efficient way to handle the transition. Ashley stood up abruptly. Trevor, we should go. Why? Dad wants to discuss this. Dad, we can work out a transition plan that protects your interests and ensures the property legacy continues. Maybe something where you retain ownership, but Ashley and I handle day-to-day management. You could even stay in the house instead of that shed. I looked at my son, sitting in my kitchen, planning my life like I was already dead. Trevor, do you hear yourself talking? I hear myself trying to take care of my father. That's when Agent Wells stepped out from behind the barn door. FBI, nobody move. Agent Wells entered through the kitchen door with her badge visible and her hand resting on her weapon. Behind her came Agent Martinez, a younger man I'd met briefly during the wire setup, carrying a file folder and an expression of professional disappointment. Trevor's face went through several colors before settling on gray. Ashley simply sat down hard in her chair and stared at the table. Mr. Sullivan, Agent Wells said, you can remove the wire now. I reached under my shirt and unclipped the recording device, setting it on the table between the coffee and the pastries. The small device seemed impossibly tiny for something that had just captured 40 minutes of detailed confession. Trevor Sullivan, Agent Martinez began, you're under arrest for financial elder abuse, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Ashley Morrison, you're under arrest for accepting illegal payments related to elder abuse and conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud. Trevor found his voice first. This is entrapment. He's our father. You can't arrest us for family conversations. Actually, Agent Wells said, we can. Financial elder abuse is a federal crime when it involves conspiracy across state lines, which your property fraud scheme does, and conspiracy to obtain fraudulent guardianship is a felony in West Virginia. Ashley looked up from the table. Dad, how could you do this to us? Ashley, I gave you both every opportunity to tell the truth, to treat me with respect, to show some understanding of what family means. Instead, you spent 40 minutes planning how to steal my life from me. Agent Martinez was reading them their rights, but Trevor interrupted. Dad, we weren't going to steal anything. We were trying to take care of you. Take care of me by forging my signature? Take care of me by accepting bribes to put me in a nursing home? Take care of me by having me declared incompetent so you could control my assets? Agent Wells stepped forward. Mr. Sullivan, we'll need you to come to the federal building tomorrow to provide a formal statement, but the recordings we have today should be sufficient for the initial charges. What happens to them now? They'll be arraigned Monday morning. Bond hearing will depend on flight risk assessment and the specific charges the U.S. attorney decides to file. After the agents left with Trevor and Ashley, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, looking at the pastries they'd brought as a peace offering. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd tried to buy my forgiveness with store-bought cookies while planning to steal $40 million and my freedom. The phone rang around 6 o'clock. Larry's voice was gentle but firm. "Jimmy, you did the right thing." "Did I?" "Those recordings show a pattern of financial abuse that would have escalated. They weren't planning to take care of you. They were planning to warehouse you while they spent your life's work." "They're still my children, Larry." "Yes, they are. And maybe now they'll have a chance to remember what that means." Larry paused, then continued. "There's something else we need to discuss. The trust documents we set up in 1978 include specific provisions for situations like this." "What kind of provisions?" "Moral clauses. If beneficiaries engage in elder abuse or financial fraud against the trust creator, their inheritance becomes conditional on completing specific rehabilitation requirements." "What does that mean?" "It means Trevor and Ashley can still inherit, Jimmy, but they'll have to earn it." Community service, financial counseling, supervised probation, formal apology, and restitution. The trust becomes a teaching tool instead of just a windfall. I thought about Sarah, about the values we'd tried to instill in our children, about the possibility of redemption even after betrayal. How long would that process take? Depends on them. Could be 2 years, could be 10, could be never if they choose not to participate. And if they choose not to participate? Then the money goes to the agricultural foundation we discussed. Your legacy still helps farming families, just not your biological family. Outside, the sun was setting over the 2,400 acres that my children had never bothered to explore, the land they'd tried to sell without understanding what they were selling. Tomorrow, I would start the process of deciding whether they deserved a second chance to learn what family really meant. 6 months later, I'm still living in the shed, but now it's by choice rather than exile. I've turned it into an office, really. Added insulation, put in a proper desk, installed a phone line for managing the agricultural foundation that now controls 60% of the Sullivan estate. The foundation supports young farming families who want to stay on their land instead of selling to developers. We provide low-interest land acquisition loans, sustainable farming education, and legal assistance for families dealing with inheritance issues. It's the kind of work Sarah would have loved. Trevor and Ashley are both in compliance with their rehabilitation programs. Trevor's serving 6 months in federal minimum security prison, followed by 2 years of supervised community service. He's working with rural families who've been victims of property fraud, helping them understand their legal rights. Ironic, but effective. Ashley's doing better. 300 hours of volunteer work at senior centers, plus formal training in elder care advocacy. She's discovered she's actually good at helping families navigate the complexities of aging when money isn't involved. She calls every Sunday now, and for the first time in years, she asks about my life instead of my assets. They'll both be eligible for inheritance once they complete their programs and demonstrate genuine understanding of what they put me through. The trust is structured so their children can inherit, even if they choose not to participate, but with the same moral clauses. The Sullivan family will either learn respect for elders and land stewardship, or the money will help other families who already understand those values. I moved back into the main house last month, but I kept the shed office. It reminds me that a man's worth isn't measured by where he sleeps, but by what he builds and how he treats the people who depend on him. The $40 million is still there, still growing, still serving its purpose, But now, it's serving the purpose Sarah and I always intended, teaching our children that wealth is responsibility, not entitlement, that family means support, not exploitation, that respect is earned through actions, not inherited through blood. My children thought I was just a poor farmer with small dreams. They were half right. I am a farmer, and my dreams are smaller than $40 million. My dreams are about family dinners where nobody's calculating inheritance, about grandchildren who visit because they love their grandfather, not because they want to check on their trust fund, about a legacy that lasts longer than money. If you're listening to this story because you recognize something familiar in it, remember this: respect isn't something you can buy or steal. It's something you build, one honest conversation at a time. And if you're someone's child or parent, ask yourself this: when the money's gone and the lawyers have finished their work, what will be left between you? Subscribe if you believe that family is about love, not leverage, and comment about the place where you learned what home really means. I bet its value can't be measured in dollars.